telling you about a phone call that I got from a fellow pastor a couple of months ago. And his question to me was, Steve, since you have a degree in psychology, what do you think is the psychology and the thinking that impacts our lives, and how does that work? And it was kind of a question that took me aback a little bit in terms of, well, are we approaching this from psychology? Because I have a struggle with psychology in the sense that what ends up, how people end up interpreting the psychology and the working of the mind and what is going on. Now, I do realize that there's a lot of information and understanding some of the physical things in terms of the makeup of the mind, how the mind works, and all of that. So what I told him in part is what I'm going to tell you today. And I have entitled this sermon, One in God. Because I had Austin read from the book of Philippians, where the Apostle Paul is talking to the church there, wrote this letter to the church at Philippi, telling them about how to care about one another, how to think. And when we think about how do we think, the bottom line, as the Apostle Paul wrote it, is this, is to have the mind of Christ. Now, having said that now, I want to also give a preamble to this in the sense that what I am going to tell you today is going to conflict your life considerably. Because what I am going to say today does not agree with the world. And it is going to be an issue in your life, if it already is not an issue. It's going to be an issue for you racially. It's going to be an issue for you in diversity, in your ethnic diversity and the like, in the way in which you may even think philosophically. And it is going to be an issue for you in terms of being kind of, you may feel like it's a bit confining, but I'm going to suggest the reality, it is none of those things at all. But it will be, and it continues to be, a bit of a problem, and I say a bit of a problem. It is a problem that is throughout the Bible. So let me start with kind of an Old Testament version of what I'm going to say today. In the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, God makes this proclamation to the nation of Israel on Mount Sinai. He gives them the commandments, and basically what he says in the commandments, there is only one God, and I'm it. And you don't worship other gods. This is the one God, the one true God. All the others are not gods. Now, that became a little bit of a problem. So when we look historically, the problem with the nations around Israel, for example, was that Israel was peculiar. It was different. The problem that Israel had with those other individuals is, whoa, you don't worship all the gods. There's the gods of the mountains, the valleys, the trees, the rivers, all the gods of Halloween. I'm kind of being facetious in a moment, but there are all of these gods. The problem that Israel had in the day of Jesus with the Romans was the Judah had this idea that there's only one God. And it got them into some problems. They were called bigoted. Who are you to say there is only one God? Well, this is going to be and is an issue that the Apostle Paul is addressing with the church at Ephesus. Now, when you think about the church at Ephesus, you have to understand this is a church that is a mix of Jews and Gentiles. And so Paul is is writing this and trying to help them to understand some things that they need to appreciate. So he starts and this may well end up being a two-part sermon because I'm only going to cover the first part of it. What Paul says later in the same chapter, we may have to cover the next time. But here's what Paul says. He's writing to the church at Ephesus. He says, as a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live worthy of the calling that you have received. So let me read about the first 7 verses here. And then we'll do that and kind of pick up and unpackage that. So he says, live worthy of the calling that you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you're called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. So this idea, especially in Ephesus, where they've got all kinds of gods, they got different ways of looking at it. So if you don't think this is a problem for any of you who are married, do you always see this the same way with your spouse? Sometimes you get a little irritated and aggravated that you don't see. And it's kind of interesting sometimes, even as you're explaining, you might be explaining the same thing in different ways, and you're trying to be agreeable, but you're not being agreeable, and then when it's all over, well, we were saying the same thing, and the like. Now, that may be true of our argument, but when we're dealing with God and what God is saying, I think we've got to be careful that we're not saying to God, well, God, I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying, I'm full of love, I'm full of peace, I'm full of joy, and this is the like. And diminishing God, where we put ourselves kind of as equals with God in terms of our understanding. So let's begin to take a look at what he's saying here. In verse 1, the basics here, in terms of the psychology, in this case, the direction, the spiritual direction that God gives us, is that we are to walk worthy. That is, we have a walk of life. Worthy of what? Worthy of what? Well, depends on what we put value on and how we see value. When I think about worthy, there is one name that just ascends all other names. There's only one who is worthy, and that is Jesus. Now, that's a Christian belief. Where does that come from? The book of Revelation. Worthy is the Lamb. There is no one else worthy. We are all sinners. We have all come short of sin. Short of the glory of God. There is one worthy. And then he says, walk in this vocation. This is a work that God has given to us. It's a job. It's a responsibility that we have. And also in this is a calling. Now, the fact, and this oftentimes will get a lot of looks, smiles, and like, what are you talking about? The fact that God would call. Now, it's not impossible in our world today to think, for example, that aliens might be calling. In fact, I think we're trying to listen for aliens. Oh, by the way, what are we trying to listen for? Intelligence from way out there. So it's okay to say that we're seeing if there's intelligent beings and that aliens who came here and built the Great Pyramids or whatever. It's okay to think that way, but to think that there is a God who is intelligent, who's the creator of all, who made more than just pyramids, created us, gets a look. And it isn't one of those looks like, well, God is calling.
Feeling the blues today or tired of life already? Do you have questions about life or need spiritual advice? The Worldwide Church of God is located in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto, California. We welcome everyone to attend our worship services with us every week at the times listed on your screen.